Alright, hello YouTube, this is Dr. Vance, and I want to give you a couple of tips on how to write chapter 5 of a dissertation. In my previous videos, I talked about how to write, gave you a couple of tips on how to write a whole dissertation, and then I broke it down to tips of chapter 1, chapter 2, 3, and 4. And this one, I'm talking about chapter 5. Now when you write in chapter 5, that's the data interpretation chapter. That's where you pretty much you're looking at your entire dissertation and you kind of interpreting the data. Chapter 1, you know that's the background of your study. Okay, in chapter 1, that's the chapter where you kind of talked about the background of the study, and you're going to have to go back and you'll have to interpret that data. So you know in your chapter 1, you had an issue, you had an if-then statement, and you also had your conceptual framework. So you're looking at your issue and your if-then statement, and you're finding out if it was true for your conceptual framework. So when I'm saying if it was true, if that fit the conceptual framework that you use for your study. So if it didn't fit, you know, okay, in this investigation, this did not fit the conceptual framework that I use. Then you're going over to your chapter 2. When you interpret that data, chapter 2, that talked about pretty much the pre-existing literature that was already out there, what other scholars were saying. So you're looking at the data from your investigation. And you're going to say, okay, from my investigation, based on my investigation, this made a difference with the pre-existing literature. What did you add to that pre-existing literature? And if you didn't add anything to the pre-existing literature, you have to say that. In chapter 3, you pretty much, that was talking about the type of study you did, if you did a quantitative or qualitative study. So you're going to go and look at your data, and you're looking at your investigation, and you're saying, okay, I had to do this type of study for this investigation to show this. So if you wanted to show a shared experience, you have to say, okay, I was showing a shared experience, so I had to do a phenomenology. But if you found something different in your study, if you saw something that talked a lot about culture, then you can say, okay, I could have did an ethnographic study to explain the culture in this. So you kind of like interpreting the data and kind of talking about, expounding on what you may have could have did differently or could have improved, or you could improve in your study. In chapter 4, that was the chapter where you looked at what everyone said or what all the data showed, and you reported those findings. So you going back, looking at the findings and say, okay, what does this mean? So you're kind of like making meaning of what the findings that was reported in your investigation. So if you did an investigation that's showing, okay, all these kids had straight A's, you're going to make meaning of that. What did that mean for all these kids to get straight A's? And in chapter 5, that's the chapter where you kind of like, you're making a conclusion of your whole dissertation. But not only of you making a conclusion of your dissertation, which is your investigation, you're making a conclusion and you're relating chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4 in that whole conclusion. But when you're making a conclusion, you're also talking about how can you expound your study into future studies. How can you make this study, how can you improve it? That's pretty much chapter 5. That is how you take the data from your investigation and interpret it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Dr. Vance, the Scholar Athlete.